Welcome to the show. And we have a packed show. And I think it's packed because my guest today and I have so many shared friendships, connections with people I care so much about. And we all have gotten connected on LinkedIn, but it's really a joy when I get to speak to someone who I cannot believe I haven't met yet, just because of how many great people we know. So I want to say, Pradyumna, welcome to the show. I am pumped. We are recording today.
Well, thank you, Darren. Love being on the show. I'm a fan of the show. I do listen to quite a few of your podcasts, and they're very, very informative. And like you said, we have a lot of people in common. So I hope that we have some kind of an impact in terms of what we're saying today.
Right. So we don't embarrass anybody, at least our friend connections. I agree on so many levels. On so many levels. There's a question we talk about a lot on this show. Let's call it mindfulness. Let's call it reflection. Let's call it empathy. Let's call it just about how we have self-awareness, how we are able to get up every day in this time and lead teams, inspire teams who, yes, maybe like working at home, who, yes, are enjoying certain just great flexibility. But at the end of the day, there's still some loneliness. Not work, have to be in the office loneliness, just human loneliness. So I always like to start with some of the adults that we have on the show who've managed teams. A tough year for most. And I'd just love to learn from you. How did you get out of bed? Not today, but think back in March, April, May. There was just a lot going on. So how did you set yourself up in those early months to then have the wind at your back to get through those next months? Just share with us anything you want. Teach us.
It's a very interesting question. Personally, I think that empathy and mindfulness are key aspects of my personality. I would say that my definition of empathy might be a little bit, maybe even broader than what most people think of when they think of empathy. So it's a really interesting word to me. I think most people think of empathy as really just about understanding people's feelings or understanding their emotional content, that sort of thing. I think that there's this kind of implicit idea that there's an emotional side and an analytical side to an individual. But I feel like that's placing a kind of a dividing line where there really isn't one, right? In many ways, I think of empathy almost in machine learning terms, right? And so what we can observe about people tend to be, their behaviors, right? So their inputs, their outputs. And ultimately what we're trying to understand is we're trying to understand how they think, right? And so that's a key part of managing people, understanding how your teams think, what drives them, what triggers them, what stimulates them, what makes them get up in the morning to do their jobs. So I think empathy is very critical, not just for, managers and people who work in the world of work in general, but I think it's actually a very critical skill set, even for people who are in the field of data science, which, from the label data science, you think it's this hyper-rational thing, it's like this purely intellectual sort of thing, but it's really not. It's about understanding other people's minds. And to a large extent, it's understanding the holistic aspect of a person. Yeah. So I think when, coming back to sort of the issue of COVID, obviously it's been a very challenging year for many people. I think that for us, it was, it kind of came, it was a surprise as it was for many people. But I think for us, the advantages that we had going into it are largely related to the fact that we are a bit of a digital company from the outset.
Right.
So working from home has always been sort of our basic model, right? And we're a fairly global company. We've got people in Asia, we've got people in Europe, and I've we conduct calls all across the world, and so I think that to some extent, other people sort of caught up to that model of being sort of digitally enabled, right? That's one of the biggest transformations, is that it accelerated this whole digital transformation that many companies are going through.
I've asked that question before, but no one's ever hit it from that angle. I think there's something beautiful about what you said, because when I've thought about it, I've never tried to articulate it how you just did, thinking of it and breaking it upon that part. For me, it's always been about every time to just, internalize and, things that I'm observing, understanding how I react and do my best to put myself in their shoes. And what I've sensed during COVID is because of the Zoom video or Google video, and because of the little boxes, I feel, at least for me, I've gotten a little bit better at watching body language. And then maybe I just said the wrong word. Oh, I saw that reaction, right? Or I use my hands a lot. or I see that person using, like, there's a lot. I'm kind of going in different places here, but the data part of the empathy is and how you attacked it is interesting. But now I'm bringing in all the visual aids as well for that data point that I didn't really have before. Your whole team on the same box, on the same exact real estate. It's very easy for me to scan the room.
Exactly.
And that to me is, I think I know who to call on sometimes first. So I've also kind of changed the order at which I call people. So I'm a little bit more sensitive on when I think I'm getting a sense of when people are getting lost, and just stopping and saying, like, let's talk about it. So I really hope that at least my meetings are more productive and people don't leave with confusion. I'm saying maybe that's not an exact empathy tie-in, but just being more thoughtful.
Yeah. I mean, I think empathy has a lot to do with also observing our own thoughts, as well as understanding how other people's thoughts influence their actions, right? So it's like you're building this mental model of these people based on all the data that you have. So what you see, whether, the body language, like you said, what you hear, the vibration of their voice, these subtle little cues that tells you, oh, this person's nervous, or this person has anxiety, or this person has something else going on in their life that is, potentially impacting their work. So it's kind of like this inherent, I like to think of it as, almost a superpower that all of us have, but some of us choose to not use it until that point when we suddenly realize, oh, it's actually useful. And this might be a weird analogy, but I tend to think of chess players as being the ultimate empaths, right? Because
go on.
Yeah. Because if you think about what chess is, people think, oh, it's strategy, it's tactics, it's all these, intellectual sorts of things. But really what it is, it's modeling the other person's mind. You're modeling your opponent's mind. You're trying to say, okay, in this situation, he's going to react this way. If I do this, he's going to react that way. She's going to do this. It's one of those games I like to refer to because it's a reflexive game, right? When you make a decision, when you ask a question, when you do something, the world responds back, and it changes the world. And that changed world is now interacting with you. So the ability to have empathy really is it's a fundamental skill that allows you to sort of interact with a world that is changing, right? Because you're constantly modeling this world, whether it's the people in the world, the objects in the world, or whatever, you're modeling that in your head. And then how accurately that model reflects the way that those people behave often determines, the amount of friction you have in those relationships, right? So, and to some extent, some people are on that side of the spectrum where they see certain people and they're like, okay, I know exactly what this person's going to say, and they have to pause and stop themselves from cutting that person off or getting ahead of that person because maybe they're going to say something different that they didn't think or that they didn't expect, right? And so it can work both ways, right? You might have this idea that, I know exactly what this person's going to do, what this person's going to say. Alternatively, sometimes you have to pause and say, wait, what if I don't know what this person's going to say? What if they have something to say that is completely new and it's completely going to blow my mind? And so you always have to have this balance between, okay, I got to sort of keep things moving along versus I got to listen and pause and I got to hear what the person is saying because maybe they're saying something new.
I'm going to throw one more at you because you just went to a place. I'm so happy you did. One of my mentors and now friend, or friend then mentor, but mentor friend, worked at Apple as a senior leader. And we would be in meetings. I wasn't at Apple, but when he would mentoring me, we'd be in meetings and he would just sit there and listen for 40 to 50 minutes and not say a word in an alpha room where everyone had to get something out. And I would just talk to him after the meeting. I'm like, how are you able not to talk? You have to teach me that skill because in a room of alphas, everyone needs to pile on. And he's like, it's something like I learned, even at Apple, we're just going to listen. And then, we'll talk last. Maybe we won't talk. I don't know if I have to talk. And whenever he would talk, as they say, like it would be gold. And it would be delivered in a tone of that you can listen to, right? So even this room is alpha, right? Male, female, whatever you want to call it. It's this alpha room. And to your point, to be able to just listen and just listen and listen and then deliver it in the right tone that's another skill. I'm getting better. Just not the best yet. It's a skill in itself. What about you in being able to listen now and Zooms and this different work? Are you finding it easier just to sit back and watch the team and you not have to insert yourself?
Yeah, I'm actually very good at that aspect because I'm not a huge talker. Contrary to what you might think, I'm not a big talker. Generally, I like to manage the amount of noise in my head. That's
Okay.
a critical aspect of everything I do. So the less noise or the better I am able to sift through my noise in my head, the better the chances I have of finding, certain things that actually stick out. So I'm a quiet person by nature. And so that actually,
I'm learning. That's a skill. And I think it's great in school when you're a talker and you're active and the teacher's like, oh, that's great. But I think still maybe teaching listening at an earlier age, I think that's a skill. But it also then kind of brings us into another type of connection here. So just follow me on this journey to the word intelligence or the term intelligence. I think when we look at this world of data storage versus data consumption and the need for what we've coined as an intelligence architecture, like there's a lot there. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
yeah. So that's a great question. So I think I've spent the better part of my career within data science, and I mean it wasn't called data science when I started out. It was called many other things. So it's a relatively new term in my career. But that being said, I think one of the critical things that that one of the functions of data science is to try to identify insights to drive decision making, right?
Yeah.
And so ideally, when we see that somebody is when we think of when we think about the word intelligence, it's, to me, if I really boil it down, it's about the ability to answer questions in an interesting way. New information that gives you a certain sense of perspective and that also informs your decision to the extent that your decision almost hinges on that information, right? Because you can always, when somebody asks you a question, you can always answer the question in ways that have nothing to do with what they actually were looking
Right.
for or whatever, right? And then there are certain answers that actually can trigger your next action.
Yep.
And so intelligence is really about trying to sift through that set of possible answers to find the best one, right? That gives you the highest information value that's going to give you the ability to make the best decision in any given point of time. And largely that's a function of your ability to sift through data, right? It's your ability to sift through data, understand what's important, what's not important. And I'm glad we started this off with a whole discussion around empathy, because I think empathy is part of that
Yes.
process, right? It's about sifting through things. And if you think about the decision-making process, we think of it as in terms of an analytical framework. But I believe that the analytical framework itself is not the only thing, right? The data that goes into the analytic framework and then the way that we weight those inputs is ultimately going to drive how that decision pans out. And I tend to think of emotions as actually as sort of the way that we weight things, right? So when we make decisions, we don't just make these cold calculated decisions. They're actually weighted by our experience, which in some way are encoded in the way that we emotionalize things. So it's this interplay between the weights and the actual decision framework itself that leads to a good decision. So intelligence is about having good model that essentially has a good interplay between those weights and that decision framework. Right?
You have a very kind way of talking about data science. I think that's a gift. So my question to you, based on this kind of riff, you talk about intelligence, and I feel like we can build a great therapist. Just how you talked about it. There is a world that if we can just build what you just articulated and someone has an emotional problem, instead of seeing a therapist, we can just put these weights together. I mean, just the way you talk about it, it's refreshing. It's easy to consume, and you don't make data and these big terms seem scary or complicated. That's a gift.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's good, because I think it's one of those things that should be accessible to everybody, because I don't think that using data is somehow a mysterious thing. I think everybody, it's just a question of how comfortable you are in making use of the data that you have.
Right. So, I mean, we talked about data storage versus data consumption. Based on how you talked about that, it's kind of like, do you want to, it's just a verse. It's like, do you want to move to Florida? Do you want to stay in Chicago? Right. There is the data, and then there is the emotional weights of it. Family versus not family, or do you want to date this person or date this person? There's something very beautiful about how you kind of broke that down. And even though it wasn't maybe where we were intending to go, but there is something beautiful about that. The weights. I like that.
And I think that, so intelligence itself is about sort of using data efficiently, using information efficiently, and actually gathering that information in the first place. So as part of my role, I am part of an organization that really is founded on the principle that there is a macro trend happening right now, right? This is digital transformation happening. And within, if you break that digital transformation down, it's really kind of there's this trend of adopting AI, adopting ML in all of these different processes, right? And you can look at it in terms of individual business processes that are benefiting from ML and AI.
Yes.
But the macro trend is towards this idea of an intelligent enterprise. And what do we mean by an intelligent enterprise? It's really an enterprise that responds intelligently to its market. And when I say enterprise, it means all of the people in the enterprise, along with all of the infrastructure, the technology of the enterprise, and how they interact together to successfully navigate the market waters, if you think of it that way. And so what would an intelligent enterprise really enable you to do? It's an enterprise, it's a concept that comes from the fact that we all think that there's this value in data, and businesses are constantly collecting data about themselves. And the question is simply, how effectively are those businesses using that data to make their decisions? And so that's where enterprise intelligence sort of comes from, is this idea that you can gather all of the enterprise data, put it in a single place where it's accessible to a lot of different people. And then those people can in turn interact with that data, intelligently process that data, and being able to bubble up, let's say, a couple of insights that drive sort of or navigate that ship of the enterprise through these waters.
So my question is, where does data anti-fragility fit into all of this?
Yeah, so I think that anti-fragility is an interesting emergent idea. If you're familiar with Nassim Taleb, he talks about anti-fragility. I think he came up with the idea of this notion of some kind of an optionality of response that tends to be positive when you are subjected to various types of stressors, right? So if you think of the modern enterprise, COVID is a great example. When COVID hit businesses today, how did they respond? How did they react? Did they successfully navigate COVID? Did they come out of it stronger than they were before? These are the kind of questions you want to ask. And when you can answer positively to say that a business was able to successfully navigate COVID, that somehow COVID made them better as a business, so that in the future, if these types of things happen, that they're in a position to actually benefit as opposed to being destroyed by it, then that would be an example of an anti-fragile business. And at the heart of an anti-fragile business is the ability to use data, right? Because if they're able to leverage the data that they have to drive better business outcomes, then ultimately, whenever you have new situations, new scenarios, new things that cause sort of business challenges, if you will, business stresses, then those businesses will come out ahead, and they will ultimately, and that ability to come out ahead is very contingent on their ability to actually analyze the situation, put it in context, which means taking all the data that they have and understanding how it fits into the larger picture, and figuring out, okay, how are they going to actually navigate the situation? And I'm willing to bet that an organization that is not effective at using the data that they have are less likely to be able to come out of something like a COVID, something like a pandemic, whatever it is, versus an organization that is intrinsically, be able to benefit from these types of new, never before seen conditions.
We got to get you on CNN or something. You have a gift, again, to take complex terms and break it down to where we all can understand them in nice sound bites. Man, oh man, I'm just lucky that we got to spend time with you today. We got to do this again. I'm going to get more terms for you to break down for everybody. This is so good. You are so gifted, not just at what you do, but as important as how to communicate what you do. So I appreciate you being on the show. This was a treat.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure being on the show.
There are a few people I would connect you with, but geez, we have so many shared friends. I'm going to go dig deeper to get you some more people. This is super neat, man, that we've got a lot of friends. And I can understand why the people I know who I just love so much as friends are connected with you. I could understand why. So this was, for me, a fabulous show. So thank you for being on it.
That's very generous of you. Thank you.
And we are the Data Standard. We are sponsored by Pandio ML, and this was a great show. And I don't even want to try to pronounce your last name, but why don't you give it a shot? Why don't you thank us and give us your first name and last name, because it's a beautiful name. I just won't be able to do it justice.
Yeah, my name is Pradyumna Upadrashta. I'm extremely excited to be here on the Data Standard. So thank you, Darren, and our team for hosting me.
Same. Great show.